Okay, we're about to start our webinar looking at improving processes across your financial operations, from purchase orders to payments. People are just joining us now, and so if you'd like to say hi and introduce yourself in the chat room, we can see where you are now, where you're joining us from, and settle down just before we all get started. See people coming in, and by the way, it's Process Improvement Month, so we're doing the right thing. And if it's not too late, I guess for those joining us, I could say Happy New Year. Probably not after the end of January, but just for now. Okay, I think we'll begin. So welcome to this webinar. It's, as I said, Process Improvement Month, pretty much the start of a new year and a good time to review and improve current, maybe outdated processes to improve business performance. And that's what our panel will be discussing. For those who aren't members or students with us already, our IFOL education panel are our experts responsible for delivering live virtual masterclasses each month. We'll be providing you with a best practice guide following this session, so there's no need to make any notes. Please put any questions you have in the chat. We'll pick them up as we go along. And we'll also be running a couple of polls, and we would ask you to vote in those if you can. At the end of the webinar, we'll be posting the link to a new survey that we've launched today, all about process improvement. All our members are invited to take part, and if you complete the survey, you'll be in with a chance to win an Amazon gift card. I'm Sue Beardsmore, and I'm joined by three of our experts, all with considerable experience in the field. Caroline Adams has over 20 years experience in shared services as a senior finance manager and in IT. She's built teams, led them through significant change, and is particularly focused on payables. Rod Chadwick is an accountant by training, holding senior roles for 25 years, former head of process improvement at Royal Mail. And also with us today is Garry Stevens, and he's been involved in finance in private and public sector for over 40 years. For 25 years, he served with Aberdeen City Council as financial services manager. One of his responsibilities was for accounts payable. He led a transformation project which delivered efficiencies and improvements in performance. In 3 years, delivered an award-winning accounts payable team. And he now works with organizations to strengthen their performance. So welcome all of you. Welcome to the panel. And we're going to start with a poll. So get ready. And it's a very simple question. How often do you review your processes? So would that be every 1 to 2 months, every 3 to 6 months, every 6 to 12 months, annually, 2+ years, when something changes, never, or you're unsure? So if you would please vote, it would be good to see what you're all thinking there. So, okay, we've got nobody does it every 2 months or 6 months, 17%, every 6 to 12 months, annually, 17%. When something changes, 50%, and a little bit of uncertainty at 17% there. So that's what people are doing now. Let's move on to the panel and say, well, where should you start with process improvement? Rod, why don't you kick us off?
Thanks, So in terms of where to start, I think you kind of have, you've got 3 choices really of how you identify where you want to improve within your processes. You can bring people in to help you to do that. There's plenty of consultants out there that will help you review your processes and identify weaknesses. There are software solutions, data mining tools that will go through your applications and identify where you've got areas that can be tightened up. Or the third one is just your people and the people that you work with every day. And I would say from experience, don't underestimate the final one. The people that work in your organization know the business better than anybody else. And I think the idea really, or the skill, is to get somebody within your organization that has the relevant analysis skills to be able to tease that out. You know, your people will know where the pinch points are. They'll know where the weaknesses are. They'll know where they're having difficulties and problems. And so whilst you might get a quicker outcome by bringing somebody in, it will be more expensive. So it kind of depends on with the approach that you want to take, but certainly I would say start with your people and make sure that when you're embark on any sort of improvement initiative or program, that you have some senior sponsorship within your business, because that makes it much easier for twofold really. One, it will open doors with stakeholders, and secondly, they tend to hold the strings to the corporate purse. So if you need some resources, they'll be supportive of what you're trying to achieve.
I've got a slightly different viewpoint to Rod, but that's healthy, because I think it's what has triggered why you want to look at your have process reviews. So is it you're looking at a KPI, a key performance indicator, and there's something pointing you for the focus on to look at? Is there a pinch point there or something? Are you doing a new transformation project or a project? Or is it just simply what we used to do in Debenhams is we had an annual program of doing spot audits. And it wasn't about trying to catch people out. It was actually about going through the processes and the procedures with the teams who are actually doing the jobs to see whether we needed to look at something. Could we bring some software in? Could we do things slightly differently? Could we automate? What could we do? And really, that's what prompted us using our own people to look at our process reviews.
Garry?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with what Rod and Caroline have said. And I think that process improvement can be something that a manager has to take on board because of changes within the organization. It could be amalgamation of departments, it could be underperformance, it could be driving efficiencies, those sort of things. And it was interesting actually seeing a poll that 50% had when something changes is when they need to be looking at business improvement. That might sound like it could be a little bit too late. If you're reviewing your business regularly, you should maybe be trying to look at business improvements before any change is needed. And I think that's a key thing for me. But certainly using people within the organization to look at driving those process improvements is absolutely key.
Okay. Should there be one person with overall responsibility? Who should be responsible for this process?
Well, in my experience, when we went through the transformation project, I was a project sponsor. So it was my responsibility to drive the project, but have the project team underneath me. For example, like you're using people from IT, HR, that type of thing, bringing in people as and when you need them, but also have a project manager in place who would keep the whole project on track. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of plates that will be spinning at any particular time. So to have a good project plan and know where you're at, where you need to get to, timeframes, and that is extremely important. But I think, the manager who's managing the team or the director or head of service are the ones that need to be driving this. Yeah.
Rod, Caroline, anything to add?
And I think it depends what it is you're looking at as to who you draw into the review. Because if, for example, we're looking at OCR technology to improve data processing, I wouldn't expect some of the individuals that were actually doing the processing to have any knowledge of the different software solutions, etc. So I would probably, in that scenario, just use the skills of a project team and someone within the payables area partnering someone in IT to look at that. Whereas if I was looking at I don't know, reconciling a balance sheet code and handling lots of data, then yes, definitely be looking at someone on the team, or perhaps someone else in the team who's got good IT skills, who can share that knowledge with the team to help better the processes when you're manipulating data and haven't got the software to do it for you. So I think different skill sets for different things.
Okay, Rod?
I think in terms of the overall responsibility for it, I would definitely be in favour of having one person who is responsible and can lead it. I mean, my current role is I'm the continuous improvement lead in my organisation, and it's a new role. So they implemented an ERP a couple of years ago. We're trying to do the sort of continuous improvement as part of the day job, and not really getting very far. And I think part of the problem is that, and it's almost a vicious circle. If you've got processes that aren't particularly efficient, your people are spending all their time chasing around trying to get things working and sort of doing things manually and reworking stuff. So they don't actually have the bandwidth or the mental sort of capacity to sort of sit back and then look at it in a more holistic way. So if you've actually got somebody separate from that who can look at it and take responsibility for it, I think that's a great advantage.
Okay, now, are there any processes that you would recommend you should start with? Which processes should you look at first?
Wow, what a
That's
question.
a difficult question.
Three collective sighs.
Yes, nobody jumping in there.
Well, I think if you're constantly reviewing how you're performing across a whole business, you're going to have pain points in some particular areas, and that could be, in finance, for example, it could be an underperforming accounts payable team. So you then have to look at how you're going to start improving that performance and strip things right back to find out exactly what's causing the issues, and build it up from there, really. I mean, if you've got a well-performing team, it's, then there's no, probably if it's not broken, don't fix it. So you're really looking at where your pain points are in the business.
Which is linked into productivity, Garry, isn't it? So again, going back to the data processing example, if you've set, I don't know, a goal of processing, I don't know, I'll just pluck some numbers, 100 documents an hour, and your team are only doing 50, of course you're going to go in and look to see why and review the process to see what's the blocker, what's not working, what should we be doing, what aren't we doing, and those types of scenarios. So it depends.
I think I'd give the politician's answer, Sue, and say it depends. And I think it depends actually from the, it's really the outcome of your analysis. So when we talked about where to start and analysing where that the output from that process kind of gives you the lead into where you start, and it will be different in different organisations as to where their issues lie.
Yeah, and going back to the poll, it would be, as you've all said, why you're doing it, whether it's because something's changed, and presumably that gives you the absolute steer of where you need to start. If it's a regular process, does everything be looked at each time that you approach it, or might it be a regular review that you look at some processes at one point, some processes at another?
Well, I think Rod touched on something, about his new role and a continuous improvement role. With the pandemic and the focus on accounts payable, I think accounts payable has moved from the background to the foreground, and so has the focus in assisting accounts payable to be more efficient with the data and the processes and the systems that they're dealing with. So because there's more focus, different organizations will be at different stages as to what they're looking at and why they're looking at it. So I'm giving you the politician's answer again, that everyone is different and there is no right or wrong answer. But for me personally, I think that processes, if you haven't got the manpower to be able to do it, that surely you can fit in looking at one process a quarter, or find the time by stopping doing something else, because it's much more important to look at your processes and see, looking for efficiencies, or actually doing something completely different, talking to other people and finding out different ideas.
Yeah. So how do you actually then get started? I mean, is it reviewed, or can it be viewed by people as a bit of an upheaval, a bit of an unnecessary thing? Is there that kind of work to be done before you can actually start the process?
Yeah, I think it certainly can. And I think the communication side of this, I mean, we'll come on to this sort of further later on when we talk a bit more about barriers, but I think, yes, communication is absolutely key, and hearts and minds are the central part of actually introducing any change, whether it be process improvement or any other type of change. So I think you need clarity of vision, you need clarity of communication, and a common idea of where you're going to get to and what success looks like. And if you've got that, then you've got a much better chance of taking your people along with you.
I mean, you're not going to do change for the sake of change. There's a need for that change, and you have to make everybody in the organization aware of why that change needs to happen and what the outcomes will be, hopefully for the better. And as I say, communication, we'll speak about that later, because that's really key to the whole thing.
Caroline, anything to add, or you just agree with your colleagues?
I'm going to agree with them.
Yeah. Is there ever, have you ever come across it yourselves where you've started to review a process, something might be changed, tweaked, and it leads to a bit of confusion because it's not completed? I mean, are there problems that you need to look out for when you're starting it?
Well, it might not have been the right change to do, and as a consequence, you go back and review, and you might tweak it into a different direction. You know, with the world and the pace that we have to work at, there's nothing wrong with, you've got to make mistakes sometimes to learn from it. And there could be something, you know, an external third party that has an influence over that change, who changes their minds as well, and that can be a director's view, in that they don't like what the outcome is and they want you to go back to how you were doing it before, or just tweak it slightly in a different direction.
Yeah, I think some of this depends. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, on you go, Rod.
Okay. I think some of this depends on the tools or the methodology that you're using to actually implement the change as well. Because if you adopt, say, I don't know, something like Agile, for example, as the methodology, what that will tend to do is to focus you in on actually encapsulating what the problem statement is first. You know, what's the business problem that we're trying to solve, rather than starting with the solution. And certainly in my experience, a lot of things that go wrong or where things go off track is where you start with a preconceived idea of what the solution is. And if you start with the problem, identify what it is that you're trying to achieve, and then look at the potential ways of doing that and do it on an iterative basis, you're much more likely to get to the end in the same way that everyone's looking to try and get to, rather than heading off at tangents.
Okay, Garry, you were...
Yeah, all I was going to say was I wouldn't go live with anything until I've tried and tested it and make sure it works as well. You've always got that to rely on.
Yeah. You touched on it there, Rod. Tools. Let's look at the tools you need. What do you need for process improvement? What are some of the things you use?
There's a vast array, I think, is the honest answer, and it can be, you know, my watchword in this was to, as far as possible, keep it simple. You know, there are some very sophisticated and very complex software tools that you can use, but you have to have the skills to A, use them, and B, understand the outputs. So if you've got people with those skills in your organization, great. If you haven't, the main thing for me, the mindset is more important. So in process change that I've implemented, I've tried to use lean as the mindset and as the toolkit, but it's fairly loose in terms, it's not a specific set of things that you have to go through. It's more a set of framework that you work within. But it's much more about having people with the curiosity and to ask the right questions, you know. So to actually sort of probe things a bit and ask why you do something. Why is the single most important tool I think that you've got in your armory. So when you look at a process, why do you do this, and then follow it through, and ultimately you'll get to the root of why you do a particular process and whether it's necessary. And quite often you can just eliminate parts of the process because actually they don't add any value.
And you would hope that an accounts payable department has got a core set of documentation, and that could just be simple scribbled diagrams if you haven't got you know, I call it sexy software, or whether you just draw something on PowerPoint, but you need the core documentation as the start point before you even think about where you're going next with it. And I must admit, I'm surprised to be hearing through networking etc that a lot of AP in smaller businesses don't have the core fundamentals. I think we make a lot of assumptions, some of us that have worked in large organizations, that everyone has got a set of documentation, but they haven't. So you know, the start point really is to put some simple documentation together of the high level processes before you then digress into the lower bullet points of where you're going next.
Yeah.
You've touched on it there, Caroline. I was going to ask you, does it make a difference on the size of the organization and what you're dealing with, or from what you're just saying, that some organizations feel that they're too small to bother?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a factor. When I took on the AP department in Debenhams, there was some very scant this is me being polite, but it was many years ago. There was some scant documentation, and because I work in a controlled environment, for me that was one of the first steps to do, was just to get some, I know we all call them different names, but some process maps, some control templates. So drawing what the process is in, and then describing what are the key control elements of that process, and then building on from that onto procedures and all the other things, business policies, etc. And I do think that some of the smaller organizations just don't bother. And obviously Debenhams doesn't exist anymore, but some of my colleagues that have gone to different organizations have certainly been in touch to say they haven't got any procedures here. So you don't know how good you are until you haven't got it any longer, is what I would say.
Well, I mean, it's a run over by a bus scenario, isn't it? But particularly in a small organization, you've got 1 or 2 people doing something. If they leave, that knowledge and procedures and everything goes with them. I think it's all relative. You definitely need to have standardized processes and procedures, regardless of the size of organization. But I think, you know, with a large organization, bringing in a process improvement, the project's going to be a lot bigger, just because you've got a lot more people and a lot more departments probably that you've got to go across. But that's not to say it's any easier bringing in a project with me where you may have only got about 5 or 6 people. It's all pretty relative. I think having a project manager, in my experience, was absolutely key to me moving things forward. I mean, they used all the software that, you know, they used to sit down with me, and it was just masses of figures and dates and everything. All I wanted to know at the end of the day was, are we on track with all the various areas that we need to be in? We'd have a monthly review meeting, but they sat in every meeting we had with any part of that process. They sat in on it so that they could then build that into their project plan moving forward. So we were making sure everything was being kept on track.
I think when you do your reviews as well, I think the crucial bit is when you've got process maps in place, which hopefully you have, is that they are something that live. They don't just, the danger is people do them and then they sit in a shelf or in a computer file somewhere, and then nobody looks at them ever again. So when you then come to review the process, you find that actually walking through what's on the documentation is completely different to what people are doing in practice. So regular review from that perspective is really valuable. But also making sure that they are living documents. People, you know, update, and someone has responsibility for updating that documentation when changes occur. Otherwise, it's just, you know, say things change quite quickly, and 6 months down the line they can be completely out of date.
Okay, Garry, you mentioned there, you know, somebody helping, giving the information, you just wanted to know what was going on. I mean, presumably some smaller organizations would say to you, it's a problem of resource. I mean, both of people and finance and what have you. What advice would you give to people in you know, smaller circumstances about getting to grips with this, about, you know, getting the tools together, standardizing processes?
I think, I mean, if it's a small organization and time is a factor, you could look at bringing in an external resource. I think Rod mentioned that right at the very start. There are organizations out there, businesses that will help manage a project from start to finish. Okay, there's a cost involved, but you've got to weigh that up against the whole situation on what why you're doing the process and improvements and what you're wanting to achieve. So you may have to bring an external resource for that, but at the end of the day, there will have to be somebody within that organization that's going to have to give up time to drive this change through. They've identified there's a need for it, so they've got to do it, really, at the end of the day.
Anything to add on the tools that you'd need, standardizing processes, the kind of documentation or methodology that you'd use before we move on to a poll?
I think, you know, fundamentally it's about keeping it simple so that anyone can follow and do it. Okay. And starting off with, you know, good old-fashioned pen and paper or pencil and paper, but it's always good to I quite often find myself, when someone's talking me through something, I actually draw it as they're talking to me.
I mean, the old-fashioned flip chart's good. Still a place for the flip chart.
Post-it notes on a flip chart. Yeah.
Is it virtual now, though, Garry?
Well,
virtual.
Yeah. Variety of flip charts, one way or another. Okay, let's have another little poll, please. If you could respond to it, we'd be grateful. Do you have a separate team or person responsible for process improvement? So do you have a separate team or person responsible for process improvement? Single choice, please. Yes, a team of people. Yes, an individual. No, or again, unsure. So this is about who's responsible for process improvement in your organization. A team, an individual, nobody, or you're unsure of what is happening there. So let's have a look at that. We can't vote. We're waiting for the response to that. Okay, so 10% have a team, an individual, 30%, no, in 40% of cases, and unsure in 20% of cases. So what's your reaction to that, experts? What you'd expect?
It's not unsurprising, I don't think. And my thoughts are that if you don't have that in place, your chances of success in really pushing through, lasting change in a successful way is reduced. But it's not. I'm not surprised to see that. No,
I think it's a fairly new concept of having a rod in your organisation. In the world around us has changed, and so has software and what's coming and what's new, etc. And for the organizations that have got the budgets, absolutely would I have a rod in every organization, because at the end of the day it's going to save you money and make you more efficient. So why wouldn't you? It's just working out the cost versus the benefits. Sorry, Rod.
No, it's true. No, it's yeah, that's right. You need to understand the business case, and absolutely right.
My council was a fairly large organisation, and we had a program management office set up. We actually had a team of people, so that if we were wanting to start off a process improvement plan, they would be the first go-to people that you would, and then they would assign somebody to come and have a chat in a meeting and see how you wanted to then take things forward. And from there, they would then start to look at a project plan in conjunction with what you wanted, and assign somebody to take you through that whole journey with you.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, it's not feasible for small organisations to have something like that.
But you're all advocating something tangible in place for process improvement. So this is your chance to convince people even more. What are the outcomes of process improvement? Let's have a bit of a look at that.
I mean, I can talk about the time I spent in Royal Mail. We introduced robotic process automation. That was kind of the crucial part. So when I was head of process simplification in there, a lot of the outputs from that, other than simplifying and eliminating waste, was around automation through robotics. And that project, which I was on for about 4 years, the return on investment was about 400%. So a really significant return, and it paid back within about 18 months. So from a pure financial basis, the case is pretty strong. I think what you have to do is to be a bit smarter about understanding what success is and how you put a monetary value on it as well. So if you're improving a process, for example, where you're freeing up capacity for people to do something more useful, it's not necessarily the value of the hours that person costs. It's what they're going to do with their time as a result of having that capacity. So one of the robots that we put in Royal Mail was around chasing warranties. They didn't have a big enough team to chase enough warranties on vehicles, and the actual sort of time that we freed up, we could have saved a couple of heads, but actually it enabled them to chase more warranty payments back and recover more money, and the differential was about 10 to 1, in terms of what you could do with that time. So you have to kind of think a bit more sort of laterally about what the benefits are to make your business case. But if you put some time into that, certainly in my experience, the business case is a no-brainer.
And if you can put automation into your month-end processes using robotic automation or something, that can mean bringing your month-end close earlier, which in effect then can have a benefit somewhere else, or it might have it could be affect treasury and funding and moving monies around. So it's not just about looking at accounts payable or finance, it's looking at the wider business impact. It could be in procurement, audit, you know, it's all around us. So it's looking at processes everywhere within the business to find out, is it a cost efficiency or is it just an efficiency? There's so many different iterations of what the benefits can be. It's just about what's right for your business.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not just about, as you say, about cost savings or efficiency. You know, things like, you know, in some of the robotics that I did in the past, customer journey was a big reason for doing it. And improving the customer journey, making it easy to do business with, growing the revenue as a result, and increasing the reputation. You know, and the reputational thing is important as well. I mean, whether that's with your customers or whether it's with your vendors, you know, either side of the financial coin, it doesn't make any difference. The principles are exactly the same. You know, and similarly with controls and compliance, you know, think of it in terms of, okay, well, not so much what will this save me, it's what's the impact if I don't do this.
Yeah, and one of the things that we did in Debenhams, and again it was for the suppliers, is I think it was probably about 20 years ago, we put in, we changed our processes so that anybody based around the globe could upload their invoices. There was a robot that used to come and sit over the top and pull those invoices. This is very graphic. Pull the invoices into the system, would go through the processes of matching and sit on the payables ledger, and the suppliers could sign in and self-serve, more importantly, but they could also they could also see what they were going to be paid and when, and it prevented lots and lots of when am I getting paid, where's this invoice. It just did away with that overnight. So again, outside of the business, it was whilst there was a business benefit in the AP department, we did it so that the suppliers could self-serve. You know, great process changes.
Okay. Before we perhaps take this a little bit further, to backtrack slightly, we've had a question that I'd like your views on. Could you please share some tools that you use and have been so satisfied with that you couldn't imagine the team working without it anymore? Any examples that anybody wants to put forward? Something that worked so well, a tool that worked so well?
Yeah, it's depends what you mean by a tool, but I suppose in terms of Agile as a methodology, as a change delivery methodology for change, I was using that in Royal Mail, and I've taken that with me to my new organisation, and I'm a huge advocate of that. I think it works tremendously well. And there are software tools that you can have, like Jira and Confluence, that kind of support that as a methodology. I can't imagine wanting to deliver change using a different methodology now, having spent many years doing waterfall approach. This for me works so much better.
I think the software we used was Prince2. It was that's what we used. I mean, I don't even start to know how it all worked. It was just a mass of arrows and figures and everything like that, but it was an extremely good tool for us. It worked really well.
Well, I'm going to simplify that by saying process maps, because everything we did, it doesn't matter what software it was done on, it was process map was the starting point, which is a very simple document to create.
Thanks very much. Is there anything else you'd like to say about the outcomes of process improvement before we move on to the barriers to getting there?
I mean, only one very brief one again, which is that another benefit that you can get from process improvement is speed to market. So the time it takes from sort of getting a sales lead, you know, and actually sort of getting a new customer built up onto your system to actually, you know, being a customer and getting them billed, the amount of time that can take can be quite significant depending on your systems. And again, simplifying those processes, automating where possible, can dramatically reduce that time, which again has a direct impact on your bottom line.
I was just going to add that when I was doing my transformation project at Aberdeen City Council, the main driver for me getting started was to improve our performance, because our performance was very, very poor. We weren't paying our suppliers on time. So that was the first driver. But then behind that came other things, like we needed to become more efficient. We needed to restructure the way we did things. And on the back of that, inevitably, we had to deliver some savings, and headcount, where most of your costs go and salaries, is the main area where they're looking for that to happen. But that doesn't mean to say that you have to get rid of people out of the organization. A lot of organizations, large ones, will carry vacant posts, for example. So there's an opportunity to get those off your budget if you don't need those posts moving forward. So it doesn't have to be the pain of actually making anybody redundant. And staff that do lose a proportion of their work, then you can fill that with more meaningful work in other areas of the business that they're working in. So there's benefits there as well. So there's a number of things that can hang off a project, not just being better performance, for example.
Okay, well, perhaps now we could move on to the barriers, because I'm sure your experience and advice will be helpful to people. So what are the biggest things that you've come across, and what would you advise people to do about it?
The biggest thing I found was the culture change and directorates trying to hang on to the work that you're trying to take off them, because they saw that as an erosion of their duties and responsibilities. So it was very important that you had the buy-in from the very, very top, and that was the chief executive. And the directors were then told why this was happening, so they had an understanding of why we were needing to bring in a centralized accounts payable function, for example, and the benefits that was going to bring to the organization. So it wasn't just change for change's sake. We were moving a particular area of work because it was needed to be done. So again, we're going to touch on communication. That's all part and parcel of what needs to be done there. But that was the biggest thing I had was the culture change and resistance to change.
Yeah, I think we've all experienced. I've always done it like this. Why do I need to change to doing it like that? So from my perspective, it's about buy-in as well. Buy-in from the teams that are going to be affected by it, and buy-in from the customers who are going to be on the receiving end as well. So it's all about communication, and I'm sure Rod's going to leap in here and talk all about comms. So I'll leave it to you, Rod.
Yeah, well, I think my big thing, certainly when I was introducing robotics, the single biggest issue was trust, and trust from the people that are going to be on the receiving end of that. I think as humans, we are hardwired when we get changed to be more focused on the perceived pain of what we're losing rather than the benefits that we're going to gain from the change. And as a result of that, to get that trust, you need to have the vision, the clarity of the communications, a genuine understanding of the fears that people have when they're facing change, and to be able to communicate in a very simple way what's in it for them. What are they going to get out of it? How is it going to change things? And being honest about that. But I think in terms of the barriers, I think you could almost sort of like do a long list, and they all begin with lack of. So it's either lack of vision, clarity, communications, resources, sponsorship, buy-in, trust. All of those things are going to be barriers, and I think that the single most important thing is gaining the trust through the good, effective communication.
Yeah, I always found that if you targeted from the bottom up and the top down, that was the best way of getting buy-in from people that were going to be impacted by it. And as you say, I think my number one thing was about being truthful with people, where it was going to have a large change. So for example, when we moved from some manually keying invoices to OCR, the first people that I talked to were the employees who did it because they loved keying in, and you're moving them to a mouse. And I know technology's moved it on again now, but that was a huge change for them to get their heads around, and to think about whether they wanted to carry on doing the job or not, because that was the choice that they had. And I'm happy to say all of them chose to stay. So it's about being truthful.
Yeah. We've had a question about culture change, changing the culture in a company. And really, have you hired experts to do that, somebody to come in from outside and work on it, or done internally by a project lead or an AP manager? Have you got any examples and experience?
Well, I think from all I would say, Sue, is internally is better because you're part of the organization, and you are. I mean, one example we had was when we were changing to our ordering system, and that included school cooks who had to go on and order their foodstuffs through the procurement portal. Some of them had never even seen a mouse. That was how scary it was. And some of them were really, really worried about how they were going to deal with that. So within my team, we went out to the schools and we supported them. We had a helpline if they had any questions. And eventually they got very competent. And to be fair, they were an example that led in how they should be doing ordering, because there was other parts of the council that weren't. The school cooks were absolutely brilliant by the end. They were doing everything properly. So with proper support internally, I think is the best way for me anyway to do that. Right. Briefly, anybody want to either comment on that or round up on the barriers?
I think just in terms of what Garry was just talking about, really it comes down to change management, in answer to this question. Good change management skills. So I would say I totally echo what Garry said in terms of, culture change within the business has to come from within. But I would say be aware and do a bit of an audit about the skills that you've got to actually do that. So if you need some training on change management and some of the tools and some of the things that you can use to do that, by all means get that, and that will help. But really, if you've got good effective change management and the will within, it needs to come from inside.
Caroline, last word from you.
Yeah, no, I've experienced both, and internal is definitely best.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. So thanks to all of you, the panel of experts, Caroline Adams, Rod Chadwick, Garry Stevens, and thanks to you all for joining us. The link to the survey is now in the chat and will also appear when the webinar ends. Please do take part in this research. It's really important, and also feel free to share the link with colleagues. For more information, just on membership and courses, please head over to the IFOL website. And this webinar will be available on demand on the IFOL website from tomorrow. So share it with anyone who you feel may benefit from it. We'll send a link to top suggestions and of course a PDF best practice guide. Thanks to the panel. Thanks to you for joining us. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye.